Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of Today's Viewpoint. I'm very, very pleased to have with us Joel Wood, Senior Vice President of Government Affairs for the Council of Insurance Agents and Brokers, joining us. As you may recall, Joel and I spent some time together almost 4 months ago. I think mid-April, Joel, is when we last talked, as the pandemic was really kind of cutting across America and wanting to learn a little bit about what we were seeing across the country, across our economy, and certainly across the insurance brokerage space. So we're very pleased to have you back today. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. We've had a few black swan moments since the last time we talked, Phil, and always grateful to have this opportunity. Always grateful for our relationship with you. But it's of course a love-hate relationship, given all the mating rituals that occur among our member firms with you guys.
Absolutely, Joel. Again, really pleased to have you. And today our focus is on two things. One, stimulus, and two, I think there's an election coming up in November that some people are interested in. So why don't we jump into it? I think first and foremost, when we last talked, we were kind of in the middle of different rounds of stimulus. And very recently, the stimulus related to unemployment benefits, the $600 a month extra unemployment benefit, has run out, and the government is continuing to explore additional stimulus, maybe. What are you hearing? What are we expecting? Should we see or expect additional stimulus that might actually help individuals, businesses? What's the rumor mill saying today?
I wish that I could feel secure in any thoughts, but any inside the beltway conventional wisdom Washington lobbyist as engaged in all this stuff as we are, who says that they know how much or when or if a deal is going to get done right now, is really talking out of their ear. It gets harder each round. While there have been a couple of days of at least amicable meetings between Mnuchin, Meadows, Pelosi, Schumer, interestingly, McConnell not engaged directly in the room. There has not yet been a single agreement on specifics. And obviously, the sides apart, the $3 trillion plus HEROES Act passed way back in May versus the McConnell proffer at $1 trillion, where Lindsey Graham very correctly said that you couldn't get half of the Republican caucus in the Senate to vote for that. So I think the administration feels desperately that they want to have a deal. Republicans want to have a deal, but really don't want to print that much more money. It's at the core of it, as you mentioned, is that $600, Republicans offering $200. I can see the framework of how they come up with like a wage replacement up to certain incomes of 60, 66, 70%, that should be achievable. Other things in there that will impact our member firms and brokers need to be watching is that there is in the House bill 100% COBRA subsidies until through January of next year. And the Senate bill starts at zero, with an assumption that they would have some subsidies. In the financial collapse 2009 legislation, there was a temporary 66% COBRA subsidy that was extended. And so perhaps that, for all of us who care deeply about the preservation of employer-sponsored insurance and the implications of 10, 14 million uninsured Americans as a result of the economic collapse. This is important stuff. We're watching that closely. Another thing is that, frankly, for a lot of brokerage firms, and mostly people were interested in the PPP and its impact on their clients. Yep. But there were, probably a quarter of our council membership that also met all the criteria and rules and did utilize the PPP. So the proposal for the PPP in the Senate proffer would not impact anyone in commercial brokerage unless you've lost 50% of your revenue, which is not going to be the case, and we know that. The policyholder community this week is making a major push to change that, to change the rules industry sector by sector so that a second bite at the apple of the PPP could be possible. So I also am watching that very closely. But Can it be done? It really does go to electoral consequences. Democrats are feeling very strongly about their chances this fall, and I think they correctly assess that any failure of these negotiations will be blamed on Trump and the Republicans in the court of public opinion.
Yeah, that's where I'm actually going to go with my next question. It's politics, I guess, but a little disappointing that something like this couldn't get done. And I think it was the end of the transition from President Obama at his kind of 8th year, while not tied to economics. The Republican, kind of put a hold on approving a judge, right? I mean, that was a little bit less consequential on the Supreme Court, I guess, depending on your perspective. But the timing of this isn't good because it makes a lot of sense that the administration would be blamed in the election, which hopefully we can do something between now and then as opposed to nothing.
But I would caution that in all major negotiations like this, nothing is done until everything is done. And so the fact that at least there has been some hospitality as opposed to angry vitriolics is maybe something that we can hope for. But the elections are looming, and brokers are watching closely on that. And I know activity, you know much more about this, but it's actually, there's nothing usual about this election year, but it is not unusual that people start laying their bets and what the implications are going to be, particularly on the tax side. We worked our butts off on in tax reform to make sure, for example, 2/3 of our member firms are structured as pass-throughs, and so to make sure that they benefited from that 20% rate. That's going to expire at the end of 2025. Even if Trump is reelected, it's going to be a heavy lift to extend that. Yeah. And then you've got all the other tax implications. And it really does go, as you mentioned, it all came down at the end of the Obama administration to one judge, one Supreme Court judge. Harry Reid had taken the nuclear option with respect to judicial nominees and presidential nominees. Mitch McConnell extended the nuclear option, which is having a 51 vote threshold for votes as opposed to a 60 vote threshold to invoke cloture, to break a filibuster. He extended that to the Supreme Court in the case of Merrick Garland. And then the question, and I think this is everything, as to what, if you assume, again, I'm just a conventional wisdom guy, and I bet $1,000 on Hillary Clinton at 10:15 on election night in 2016. So what the hell do I know? But even if you assume, that Democrats win the Senate, which is conventional wisdom by a few, they're not going to have the 60 votes. And then will Chuck Schumer invoke the nuclear option on legislative stuff? It's just a rule of the Senate. It's not enshrined in law. It's not in the Constitution. If he has 51 senators that vote with him, I'm getting ahead of myself, but this is big picture stuff. For all of us who care about group health insurance, brokerage benefits, what does a vibrant public option look like under a Biden administration? How far could they go? I think that's very, very dependent upon how many seats would they win? What would the contours of a Democratic majority look like? And for all we know, Kanye is going to be the president, and that's a whole nother equation.
Yeah, that announcement was a little unexpected, but I think it faded quickly. And I think, all eyes continue to be on Joe Biden and who his vice president partner may be in this process. But the election is certainly going to be very interesting and has a lot of looming potential impacts on the economy and on our industry. I think you're correct in that a lot of our clients are hedging a little bit and trying to figure out if there is sweeping change in the administration, in the Senate, what that could mean to all tax rates, not just capital gains. And a lot of organizations are wondering how quickly legislation could be implemented. I think as we've looked historically, we haven't seen a retroactive implementation of a capital gains increase, but we have seen ordinary income tax brackets be retroactively implemented. So, questions around, is the earliest a change could happen 2022, or is it possible something could go into effect 2021? And I think to your point, it really depends on obviously what happens in the Senate and how aggressive they tend to get to try to push legislation through.
And I would note that when it comes to just taxing and spending, you don't have to necessarily have to take the nuclear option, because you've got what ultimately the ACA was passed in this process known as reconciliation. If it has to do strictly with a matter of the federal fisc, taxing and spending, you can do that with 51 votes. That being said, the way that Madison created government it is always, even to this day, even with all of our black swan moments and all the tumult of this year, it is always easier to beat something than it is to pass something. And I remind everybody that when Barack Obama was elected, he had that 60 vote margin in the Senate as long as Ted Kennedy was alive. And he had a 79 vote majority in the House of Representatives. Even if you assume a major Democratic wave election, which conventional wisdom Washington does, and I've seen elections like 1980, 1994, where there were a lot of accidental congressmen that just got elected that weren't on anybody's radar. So I don't discount anything in a year like this, and my confidence level is not high in my own predictive skills. But I'm really struggling to see, I can count to Democratic control in those Senate seats, but I can't count anywhere close to 60 votes. And right now, Republicans, I don't think nobody thinks they're going to regain the House because of all the purple districts and the number of retirements. But Republicans are only 17 seats away from control in the House. And there are 30 Democrats that occupy seats that Trump won. And my last stat for you is that, and I find this fascinating, and this is why I hedge on everything. And this is according to Charlie Cook, the best political pundit in DC. In 2018, a great turnout year for Democrats. I mean, they really turned it out. The anti-Trump factor, particularly among suburban women, was astonishing. So if you look at the core Democratic voter, which is college-educated women of all races, nationwide, 9 million registered college-educated women of all races failed to show up and vote, in a great year for them. If you look at the Trump base, which obviously is non-college educated white men, in 2018, 40 million of them failed to show up and vote. And so I'm not saying necessarily anything. I don't know, what the motivating thing, but when you look at intensity and where those voters are, I think that everybody should be mindful of that. And I'm not saying that with any trying to put my finger on the scale one way or another. I just find that to be a very noteworthy statistic.
Yeah, absolutely. Joel, this has been fantastic. A really great update. We could spend hours together, and I actually think people would continue to watch, but we're going to keep this blog to close to 10 minutes. So maybe we can get back together again another 3 or 4 months from now and give our readership, and which there's a lot of crossover between our collective readership, another update closer to the election as we're seeing things percolate, or if something major happens, we'll pull you back in as well. But we always appreciate your time, your insight, your wisdom, and your humbleness on your ability to predict elections about 6 hours before they're called. So
I just don't want you replaying anything that I said in the next interview. But thank you for the partnership, Phil. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Joel. We'll talk again soon. Thanks again.
Thanks, Ed.